Okay, we're live streaming now, Chair.
Well, thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Children and Young People's Learning Scrutiny Panel. I'll go straight into agenda item 1. Any apologies for absence, Georgina?
Yes, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Saunders, and Councillor Barry Cooper is substituting on his behalf.
Brilliant. Thank you for being here, Councillor Cooper. Agenda item 2, any declarations of interest? Have we got any? Take that as a no. Thank you. Agenda item 3, the minutes from our last meeting, the 18th of January. Can we approve those? Great, that's approved. On to the meat of the meeting. Agenda items 4 and 5. Behaviour, discipline and bullying in schools, written evidence from schools, parts 1 and 2. For these agenda items, we'll be considering written evidence from schools. The first 2 pieces of evidence will be from schools that have encountered higher rates of fixed term and permanent exclusions. These submissions have been received from Outward Academy Acklam and the King's Academy. This evidence highlights the challenges faced by schools in dealing with poor behaviour, the causes of pupil behaviour problems, example, unmet educational or other needs, and the strategies adopted to promote positive behaviour, manage poor behaviour, and prevent and tackle bullying. After that, we've got 3 pieces of evidence from schools who've demonstrated good practice in their approaches to behaviour, discipline, and bullying. This evidence has been provided by Acton Grange, Park End Primary, and Unity City Academy. This evidence will highlight the types of sanctions used by schools that can impact on a pupil's educational outcomes and life chances, and the successful and proactive strategies and solutions used to promote positive behaviour, manage poor behaviour, and prevent and tackle bullying. We've got Karen Smith, who's our Head of Achievement, and Trevor Dunn, who's our Head of Access to Education, who are going to present this evidence to us. If we've got any questions for the schools, if you ask them now, Georgina will make a note of them and pass them on, and hopefully we'll get some answers before the next meeting. So Karen and Trevor, I'll hand over to you if you'd like to start. If we just go through each school, give us the evidence, and then we'll ask questions, and then we'll go on to the next one if you want to do it that way.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I wonder, would it be easier? We've done a very short PowerPoint presentation which just sums up some key points. Would it be helpful if we just went through that, and that might then trigger questions or thoughts from members? It'll certainly help, I think, to keep Karen and I to keep our thoughts in order, if that's okay.
Yeah, that'd be great, Trevor. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to attempt to share, and I always find this a challenge, so bear with me. Okay, I'm hoping that you can see that PowerPoint on screen. So this is a bit of a double act, I think, with me and Karen, and I'm sure Karen will just jump in as and when. Essentially, Karen looked at the primary responses, and I looked at the secondary responses. Although we've clearly there's some crossover there, so we'll just take it as it comes. So firstly then, in terms of the schools that responded, as the Chair just outlined, 4 secondary schools and a primary school, and all of those schools, I'm sure the heads would agree, have strengths and weaknesses, and they're different in their nature and their intake to some degree, and they have different ethoses and different approaches to learning and so on. So what I tried to do was just kind of pick up some common themes, because there was, when reading through, that there is a lot of common ground, and there are a lot of issues that all of the schools, whether we would regard them as schools that are that have a very good and proactive approach to managing behaviour, those perhaps less so, they were all kind of saying very similar things. And those 5 points there seem to come out a great deal, and they're all valid to some degree in my view. So deprivation, or this point about deprivation and deprivation somehow being linked to poor behaviour, comes out strongly in all of the responses, certainly in all of the secondary responses, where they talk about the deprived communities that they serve. And that links to the 5th bullet point. There are also arguably with hard to reach parents and perhaps parents that aren't supportive of education and so on. Now it's an interesting one because I can remember back in the day when Ofsted and the government were more willing to accept deprivation as a indicator or an excuse, I suppose, for poorer outcomes. Those days largely have gone, and deprivation is essentially taken out of all of the accountability models these days. So this link that schools and head teachers often want to make between deprivation and poor behaviour is subject to challenge. I've worked in and led a number of schools in deprived areas, and I suppose anecdotally, I probably would subscribe to the view that a school in a very deprived community, serving a very deprived community, offers greater challenge than one that serves a leafy suburban community. But I suppose I'm just raising the point that just because you're in the school serves a deprived community doesn't, in my view, necessarily mean that the school should expect or the school will have poorer behaviour and outcomes. It's not necessarily the case, depends on a lot of other factors as well. But it's certainly a point that all of the schools felt they needed to make in their evidence. The next point about the diversity of their school communities was again, or could be seen as a controversial point. But several of the schools made this point that they serve a very diverse community. There are a number of religions and races and cultures. One school described their school community as a melting pot, although they then try to put a positive spin on it. And I thought that's an interesting phrase to use because melting pot to me does feel pejorative in its use, but that might just be the way that I read that evidence. But certainly it's true, you know, that in Middlesbrough we have a diverse community, and therefore the schools reflect that, the school cohorts reflect that. Whether we think that should be a justification for or an explanation of poorer behaviour is more debatable. Personally, I don't. I think poor behaviour or poorer behaviour is a factor of many other things. Similarly, SEND or special educational needs was referred to a lot as some kind of, I was going to say justification for poor behaviour. I don't mean justification, but explanation perhaps might be a better way. So all of the schools, I think, to some degree, emphasise the fact that they have a significant proportion of children with special educational needs, and those children may present greater challenge. Again, it's not necessarily the case that SEND children will behave less well than children without SEND. So I'm just always cautious about accepting that premise. And I'm even more cautious about accepting the next one, which is about looked after children. Several of the schools made a case or about the high number of looked after children they have within their community. Although they didn't necessarily say that was an issue that created an issue around behaviour, there was an implication that those children may present a greater behaviour challenge. Or greater challenge in some regard. Again, it's a premise that I personally don't accept, but I do accept that the more factors the more variable factors that a school has in its community and in its cohorts, the greater the focus on good and strong management and engaging and effective teaching and learning, the focus on those things becomes perhaps more pertinent, would be my view. But all of the schools made these points. So those schools that we would say are represent schools where the behaviour is really well managed, those perhaps less so to some degree, they all said very similar things. So they all kind of start from the same premise. And I suppose it's not surprising because all schools, very few schools, don't have some deprived children of different religion, children with special educational needs and challenging parents and looked after children in their courts. All schools have those factors, and therefore I can almost discount them because all schools have them. Yet some schools have excellent behaviour, some schools have not so good behaviour. So I think we just need to kind of see that in a context. I think if the schools were here, and they're not, so I'm not speaking on their behalf, but I'm reflecting on their evidence. I'm guessing if the schools were here, some of them would say, yes, but we have more of those things. We have, in our school, we have more deprivation than other schools. Or in our school, we have more parents that are hard to reach and won't speak to us than in other schools. And that's probably true. That's probably the case that some schools have more of these variables than others, such as life, I think, would be my view. Just
Trevor.
continuing this then.
Trevor.
Sorry.
Trevor. Sorry, Chair, to interrupt, Trevor. Just to let you know, the presentation isn't sharing, so I've sent it to Joe and to. No, it isn't. Not on ours. Well, on my side, it's a black screen. As can other people's.
Yeah, we can see it, Rob.
Just me then. Sorry, everyone.
Right. I was going to say you're all being very patient with me if you can't see it. Okay, sorry, I'll speed up a little. So deprivation, parental engagement, similar, from the primary school Park End, and I don't want to. I'm just worried that I'm making light of that. I'm not. Areas where parents, schools where the parents don't want to engage particularly, don't see the value of education, don't really support what schools are trying to do. I know those schools well because I've worked in them, and it is more difficult than perhaps in more middle class environments. I've never really worked in a middle class school, so I'm struggling to say that. Karen, you might have done though. Have you got any middle class experience?
I do have experience of working in middle class schools. I do, yes, but in this context of Park End Primary School, the common themes that emerged through Julia's report were deprivation and parental engagement. But as Trevor described before, the contextualised information that previously Ofsted did look at is no longer in existence, and it does have an impact on overall Ofsted outcomes of schools. However, with the new education inspection framework, there is more leniency around and a more fair viewpoint from inspection teams when looking at the types of learning styles, activities that schools do adapt depending on their cohorts. So for Park End Primary School, whilst deprivation is a significant impact on overall behaviour, standards of the school, it's 63% disadvantaged Park End. Parental engagement is actually a plus. They've got really positive parental engagement to the point that actually it's referenced in an Ofsted report, claiming that, overwhelming majority of parents comment positively on the care given to their children to help them learn. So again, through discussions with pupils in school, Ofsted also found out that pupils enjoy coming to school, and the parents back that up with their comments as well. So I think from a primary perspective, I've put these common themes down as actually, apart from deprivation, is a positive aspect. And I think from a primary perspective, Park End are certainly doing an excellent job in managing behaviour.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, sorry, I was putting that out of context, wasn't I? Okay then. So as the evidence develops from all of the schools, there are again some clear strategies that the schools say work, and I don't think there's anything necessarily earth-shattering. Moving forward too quickly. Earth-shattering in this, but it's interesting nonetheless because all of the schools are saying very similar things. So they're all talking about the things that work for them. And I guess the things that work for School A will tend to be the same that work for School B and will work for School C. But let's have a look at them. So building relationships with parents. seems like such an obvious thing, but one of the schools in particular, I think it was Acklam Grange, made the point that they start that process even before the children arrive. So when the children are in year 6 and they are being allocated their secondary school and they're starting to do transition work, then Acklam Grange School said they make an effort to get out there and meet the parents and welcome the parents into the school so that they can start to develop a relationship which is going to last 5 years or more. And so taking that seriously, getting parents to buy into the ethos of the school and the messages that and to be supportive of the school is clearly seen as important. And I think we would all agree that schools that don't do that are always going to face an uphill battle in terms of trying to, because the thing is, I think one of the schools, I can't remember which one, so I think it was Acklam Grange, said it's always better if you've started out at the beginning of year 7 with a good relationship with the parents. Then if something happens later, the parent has a good experience of the school. Whereas if you don't do that until perhaps the child is in year 9 and you've never really engaged with the parent, and the first experience the parent has of the school is a negative one because the child's in trouble, it's much harder then. It's much harder to make progress, and that makes sense to me. They talked about making good behaviour part of the ethos, and Acklam Grange have this thing which they call a respect agenda, but essentially it's trying to build an atmosphere where children understand what the expectations are in terms of their behaviour towards staff, the behaviour towards each other, the behaviour towards their learning, and trying to ingrain that into all of the children right from the first time that they come into the school. And several schools that they reference it in different ways, but that seemed to be quite a common theme to me, that it was about making the expectations part of everyday life, not something that it's not you need to go to the rule book and check. It's just what we do every day, because that's how we behave when we're in the school building or wearing the school uniform. Similarly, this idea of teaching good behavior came out in several of the school's evidence, that actually it may be flawed to make the assumption that children just know instinctively or by osmosis how to behave or what good behavior is. And it needs to be taught, sometimes quite formally, in a lesson environment. And also this idea that staff need to model good behavior. So whatever it is that we want to, or we expect the children to do, the staff need to be doing that all of the time to reinforce it, so that the children are seeing these good behaviors, these respectful conversations, the dignified way of moving around the building and so on. If they see the adults doing that, behaving in that way, and if they're taught those things in lessons, then again it's gonna rub off, and they're gonna behave in a much better way. It seems to make sense. There was a lot of reference from all of the schools about accessing support, and there is a lot of support out there for Middlesbrough schools. So the 3 things I've listed there, CAMS, the SEND team, or the inclusion team, and the virtual school, were referenced. But there are other support systems beyond those things. But I think it's good that schools are acknowledging that they don't always have all of the answers and can't always solve all of the problems. And sometimes they do need to go outside of the school and look for external people to support. And in the Middlesbrough area, we have a number of really good support systems and networks who can offer not just advice and guidance, but also sometimes financial support and expert intervention with the children and so on. I used to work in Durham, and we are in Middlesbrough. The level of support that schools have on offer is far greater than was available in Durham. Yet Durham is often regarded as a supportive environment. So I think I was glad to see the schools referencing that, and they all did to some degree or another. And it seems to me that those schools who are most keen to come forward and most keen to say, we can't really deal with this situation on our own, can we have some support please? They're the schools that have the best behaviour. Perhaps that shouldn't be a surprise, but it does seem to be the case. They all talked about the importance of pastoral staff, and spending a lot of money on employing staff, both teaching and non-teaching staff, who will work with children, who will meet them, who will have time to talk about the issues that sit behind the behaviours. It's my view that children, when they are poorly behaved, it's for a reason. You know, children don't never behave badly just for badness' sake. There's always a reason for it, and I think those schools that are best at finding out what the reason is and then dealing with the reason overall have the best behaviour track records. So that investment, or the willingness of the school to invest the most in pastoral staff, seems to relate to their overall success and having a good and well managed environment. And similarly, I suppose it's part of the same theme really, but this idea about having therapeutic support and mental health support available easily and all of the time, it's becoming more common these days. But again, those schools that have the most of the most easily available services in terms of mental health seem to be the schools that have the best behaviour. And I think there's something there, to my mind, it's about care, and it's about the school, the leadership in the school saying, we need to really provide the best services we can for our children, because they come to us from all kinds of backgrounds, with all kinds of physical and mental health situations. And the more we can put in to help our children, then the better the outcome will be. And the facts seem to bear that out. Again, those schools that have the best access to mental health and therapeutic support are the ones that have the best behaviour track records.
So just picking up that bullet point number 1 there, on strategies that work, one. We've worked hard to refine a data sharing agreement with schools that allow non-statutory levels of information to be shared amongst the school community. And one of the successes that we've developed is a transition document that is led from primary schools and feeds into the secondary school feeder schools, providing those secondary schools with real knowledge of the pupils they're about to receive in year 7. So whilst there is the academic side of it, this transition document is basically as to what is described what makes the child successful in primary school. What do secondary schools need to know about the individuals to ensure that they continue to be as successful as they were in primary schools. And we've now extended this into PVIs in nurseries as well. So we've got a real continuum system going on of providing the next destination of the child's and young person's schooling with as much information from one setting to the next, allowing that young person to be successful. And that's really well received. It's currently going out at the moment, so primary schools will receive it this week. They'll have some time to complete it, and then they feed the information up into their feeder secondary schools. And it can be information such as the young girl, and I'm being stereotypical here, goes into secondary school year 7, would ordinarily wear perhaps glasses in the primary school, then is more concerned about appearance as they move up over, as they get older, and the glasses are no longer worn. That means that child might not be able to access learning, and this is an element of behaviour that Trevor was talking about that can impact negatively on that young person and their outcomes. So it's about those kind of reminders. Karen Smith wears glasses, reminder to bring them into school. Little pointers that encourage those good behaviours and that sound understanding and knowledge of the children going into year 7 from a secondary perspective. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, yes, just continuing this theme of the things, the issues that schools all seem to be saying make a difference. Again, no surprises, but schools talked about reward systems, rewarding good behaviour to help children and young people understand that if they do the right thing, they get something pleasant. Reward system, in my experience, rewards generally, in my experience, are always far more effective than sanctions. But interestingly, schools often forget about them. So it was reassuring to see that schools, at least 2 of them, did reference rewards and rewarding focusing on the positives rather than the negatives. A couple of schools talked about, I think 3 schools talked about their consequence system, which is just a kind of staggered response to poor behaviour in class. Really, schools do it in different ways, but some members will have experienced the C system. You know, C in class, a minor offence gets a C1. It's a bit like a red card system in a football match. If the poor behaviour continues, it escalates to a C2, C3, and so on. And each level in that system carries with it a more severe sanction. And the idea is that it's giving children an opportunity to understand they're doing the wrong thing and to change the behaviour when it's at a low level, rather than waiting and doing nothing and then exploding when it gets to an unacceptable level. Generally speaking, in my experience, that kind of thing works. It generally depends how well it's done. So having a consequence system won't necessarily improve behaviour. It's more about how consistently and fairly it's applied in school, and it always, to my mind, needs to be paired with a reward system, so that you're pulling up for poor behaviour, but also providing a reward for the good behaviours. So when those things work, they are effective, or can be effective, and several schools mentioned work around those areas. They tend to work badly, I think, when they are seen as draconian, or they are applied by some teachers and not others. So there's disparity in the system, and children soon realise that. Or they're used as just a way for teachers to be able to offer more, in the eyes of the children at least, ways for teachers to be able to offer punishments more quickly. So when they work well, they can, when they're delivered well, they can make a difference. Withdrawal systems seem to be used by all of the schools to one degree or another. This is where a child who is, again, behaving badly in class is taken out of the class and is either given some time to calm down and think about what they've done and then be reintegrated back into the lesson, or perhaps is taken away to a quiet place and might stay there for a period of time, the rest of the day, a couple of days, whatever. These approaches vary. Interestingly, a lot of years ago, in fact, the theme used to be, or the approach used to be a one of using withdrawal rooms, which was pioneered by a school called Nine Styles in Birmingham. Nine Styles were the leaders in this area, where they were very draconian, and when a child almost lifted their head, the child was taken immediately out of the class, was put into a silent room, which was deliberately painted black. The walls were black, and there was booths. It was very dim light. There was booths all the way around. The child would be sat in a booth, so they were unable to see anybody else, and had to work in silence for the rest of the day or a number of days. And I remember years ago, I went down to Nine Styles for other reasons, but I was there, and they were very, very proudly. I was shown that this room, and lots of schools went down that punitive direction. But since then, that's been discredited to a large degree, and a lot of schools have backed away from that now. And one of the schools mentioned that. One of the schools was talking about their withdrawal room, and they said, we've now taken out all our booths and made it a more pleasant room, which was reassuring, because in my view, when you treat children in that way, it very rarely changes their attitudes. They just become more intransigent and more determined to not comply to whatever it is you want them to comply with. So I was reassured to see that schools are rethinking that and are withdrawing children, because sometimes children do need to be taken out of the environment, but then they're being treated with dignity and respect. Report systems are very, that very old idea of being on report, where you carry around a bit of paper, or sometimes they're done electronic these days, and every teacher during the day makes a comment about how well the child has done, and then often those comments are shown to the head of year or to the parent at the end of the day or whatever. Again, can work well, and several schools mentioned that they use that as a part of their approach to behaviour. Can work. I'm a little bit cynical about report systems, but because I think it can often be more negative than positive. But also I've seen them done in a very positive way, so they can be effective. So they were a variety of, all of the schools, I would say, to some degree referred to or mentioned those things. So a lot of commonality. But there were a couple of things that stood out for me as things that were almost above, or over and above what everybody else is doing. I thought they were interesting just to reflect on those very briefly. 2 schools mentioned that they've got, or either have or are developing their own AP, alternative provision opportunities for children. The best example of that is Acklam Grange, where they've been doing this for a couple of years now, where they've got their own off-site arrangements which they control and manage, and what it does is essentially give children the opportunity who are just struggling for whatever reason. They're struggling with the mainstream timetable and lessons and life in school. It gives them the opportunity to work in a different place, in a smaller group, on key skills for a short period of time, with a very positive map and roadmap towards reintegrating back into the mainstream and avoiding permanent exclusion. It's about helping the child to develop the skills that they'll need to be part of the community, as part of the school community, and that's King's mentioned that as well. They're perhaps not quite as sophisticated, but heading. That's a direction that they would like to head. Then they're doing some of that work, and I think that's very positive. It's about schools understanding that they need to vary the curriculum, vary the environment, be more sensitive to the needs of the child. The other thing that Acklam Grange mentioned was the Proclaim project they're in, which clearly is close to my heart because it's done in association with the virtual school. But this is a piece of project work that 2 schools in the town are involved in, which is about increasing the staff's knowledge, collective knowledge of the trauma that being looked after often will have for a child, understanding more in greater detail what that means, and then reflecting on how staff, not just teaching staff, all staff in school, can change their behaviours to support the needs of that particular group. My view is that and Karen may agree or disagree, but generally speaking, strategies, I think that and approaches, it's more of a philosophy than a strategy. So that philosophy about being more understanding of the issues that a child might have and having greater knowledge of those issues, teaching in a different way, the strategies that work for those particular children, it's just good teaching to me. It's just really good, supportive, sensitive teaching. And if it's good for a looked after child, it's probably good for any child. So schools that have gone down this road and have taken the time to develop a different way of working and said, okay, we know that we need to change. We know that we need new skills. Can you help us develop them, as Acklam Grange are actively doing? We tend to see in those schools better behaviour, a more positive behaviour culture. So I thought that, I mean, the school mentioned it in their evidence, and I think it's a really positive thing that they are accepting that they've got to do better. Kings similarly have done some, they've done some similar work in this regard as well. They're accepting that some of their staff perhaps have more traditional views and attitudes and just need upskilling and updating and need to think about things in a different way. So that's great. A couple of schools mentioned a similar vein, really, that they are going above and beyond in terms of improving the quality of teaching. And I do believe that or my experience would tell me that nearly always poor behaviour is the result of poor teaching. If you get poor teaching, so lessons aren't engaging and they're boring and they're tedious, children, particularly teenagers, will get bored, and when they get bored, they'll do the wrong thing. We're all like that to some degree. But if you've got really good teaching, really engaging teaching, really fun, dynamic things going on in the classroom, you haven't got time to be naughty because you're too busy doing the right things. So I think when schools acknowledge that and don't just want to blame the children, but want to kind of say, okay, maybe it is our curriculum, maybe it is our approach, maybe it's our teaching style, and maybe we want to do it differently, we tend to get much better behaviour outcomes. So a couple of schools talking about that, looking at that differently, and similarly with this having a high expectations and high support culture. I read that in one of the schools. I think that's absolutely the correct position, you set really high expectations for children, but you also help them to achieve them, and don't just punish them when they don't. So I thought those four things were kind of where we want to be, the direction that we want all of our schools to be going in. And then if I can just ask Karen to reflect on primary.
Yeah, so there's just a couple of pointers that I just want to pick up that Trevor was describing there. I think all schools in Middlesbrough have engaged positively to address any behaviour issues. From a primary perspective, we encouraged and funded primary schools to undertake the Thrive programme, which was delivered by Priory Woods. Now, Thrive is an intervention, a classroom intervention, where school colleagues, class-based colleagues, are trained to recognise the tics or the triggers that that a young individual might present in a moment before a meltdown or before any poor behaviours then impact the overall lesson and learning for the rest of the class. And that has been a real success story. I think we had 9 primary schools engage in the Thrive programme and more after that, independently of the funding that we had. We also had a hugely positive behaviour conference back in 2019, and some of the points of rewards and sanctions that Trevor was describing there were really unpicked and turned around into positive mechanisms, and I think that's where Acklam Grange has managed to really home in and pinpoint areas of their own behaviour policy that they needed to adapt and reflect upon. But I think also, thinking about the fact that, if children are bored, then, behaviour does suffer as a consequence. But again, referring to the Ofsted framework with the new quality of education judgment that's been in place, with the intent, implementation and impact, otherwise known as the 3 I's, being introduced into the framework, schools are now really looking at their cohorts and the nature and the makeup of children and young people, so that they're teaching the right thing, so that they're not just going through and ploughing through a national curriculum and therefore disengaging pupils in something that the pupils might already know of, and they're able to build on that. So obviously the pandemic hasn't promoted that work, but what we are seeing now is schools resetting that and looking back at the intent. And the intent is, are we teaching the right thing for our children? And that is going to look different in every single school in Middlesbrough. The implementation is, are we teaching the right way for our children? Are we responding to their needs? And of course, the impact is the outcome for that. But moving on to Park End again. We have a categorisation process for schools in Middlesbrough, and regardless of its deprivation, its nature and makeup of the school, Park End is one of our secure schools. And when we categorise schools, we don't just look at attainment outcomes, we look at leadership, we look at attendance, we look at observations as advisors go in and work with monitoring with schools. And this is a secure school, it's one of our green schools. And they have reviewed their behaviour policy, and I think this was on the back of their attendance at the behaviour conference as well. And as we've seen in the report, their behaviour policy is underpinned by the universal offer, and that's coupled with quality and early intervention. That means that behaviour is good. I described to you before around the Ofsted comments. But I think, in ensuring and having that impact as a percentage, we can see that the behaviour policy is working in Park End. This universal offer is working because we've got 91% of Year 1 pupils achieving the required phonics standard. And that was in the grip of the pandemic in 2020. And this score is 20% above national scores for last year. We don't have any recent data sets, but again, referring back to 2019, 64% of the Year 6 cohort achieved the combined measure in reading, writing and maths for Key Stage 2, and this is in line with national outcomes. So we know that their behaviour, this universal offer is working well, otherwise we wouldn't be seeing these outcome percentages. but their safeguarding team in school is fantastic. The DSL actively engages with the networks, and safeguarding and practice in school is really excellent. I think one of the things that has struck me, in addition to the report that Julia submitted, is that anecdotally, through frequent conversations with leaders in schools, behaviour is good, and the pandemic has not impacted negatively on this school whatsoever in terms of behaviour. Quite the opposite, in fact. Julia reports children being extremely proud, and the routines that are in place have really benefited overall behaviour, mental health in schools. And I'm talking about the children here, not the staff, because that's a different entity, isn't it? We talk about mental health and stresses there. But in terms of the children wearing their uniforms, you know, that they know they've got to not touch things. They know they've got to routinely walk a certain way around the school. And these routines and level of practice as a result of the pandemic have really benefited the pupils, as has the relationship with parents. The parental engagement is really phenomenal. Julia's found exceptional ways of communicating in person, knocking at doors, writing letters, the website, lots of innovative ways of engaging with parents. And she is hosting a holiday activity scheme during the Easter holidays, where she's accessed some funding from the local authority to put on enrichment activities during the Easter holidays, and they're going to be craft activities and sports activities, again to keep those children into the routine of attending school. And whilst her action plan was only submitted on Friday, she's emailed already this morning to say take up is great. And I think you know, the best practice that Park End has implemented is doing its job.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, I'm going to try and stop sharing now. Should be back to normal. There we go. Thanks, Chair.
Great, thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Karen. Have you got any questions for Trevor and Karen? Councillor Halawi?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I have quite a lot of simple questions and some more in-depth questions, as well as some comments and suggestions. So I'll start with a quick question. How many schools were engaged in submitting their evidence, please? How many were asked to submit evidence? We only got the responses from the ones we saw.
Chair, should I respond? All of the schools that were requested to Councillor Halawi submitted evidence. So it was UCA, Park End, Acklam, Grange, from memory.
Kings.
So we only asked one
Kings.
primary, actually.
Yes, and,
Okay.
and I suppose that also reflects the focus of this scrutiny. It typically is a secondary issue, although, you know.
Yes, yes, I take that. Yeah. I'm just make a quick comment and then let some other people ask. In one of the reports, it says in part 1, the challenge that they face, I won't name the school right now, it talks about children looked after, and it says naturally these children present greater challenge. I was absolutely jumping off my seat. It is not natural to suspect or even think that a certain sector of the population present greater challenge. I think that's totally unacceptable. And I think terminology says a lot. We don't have expectations that behaviours are natural from certain sectors of the population. That's very disadvantageous to that sector of the population to have a starting point where anybody might deem it natural to think that they're more of a challenge. I also take issue, as Trevor did, with the melting pot idea. I think that analogy is very poor, to think that we're going to put all our children of all their different ethnicities, diversities into a pot, stir it all up and melt them together. We might want an outcome that is excellent behaviour, but we're not going to melt all our communities and get them all into one little mix of the soup. No, we want them to be valued for their diversity. We want them to be acknowledged for their diversity. We want them to be proud of their differences, and we want them to be supported in expressing that. So I think even some of the language of the evidence was quite quite a surprise to me that schools would write such words and such expressions.
If I could just respond, Chair, certainly to the first point there with regards to the looked after children. Yeah, I mean, and clearly I agree wholeheartedly. That language is important always, and the stereotyping or that stereotypical view of any group, be it looked after children or indeed any other group, is so unhelpful. And we have challenged when we've come across it, we have challenged schools and head teachers about that because it doesn't help. And indeed, if it was for some other protected group, it would be illegal to stereotype it in that way. So I think it is important that we call it out when we see it. And I think it's crucial that heads and senior leaders understand that kind of stereotyping or stereotypical views, casual language, is very, very unhelpful, both to their credibility and to the children's outcomes. So yes, I agree.
Thank you, Trevor. Thanks, Councillor Howe. I absolutely agree. I think certainly if that's what they're saying to us, then even if it's an unconscious bias, that they're obviously going to display that to the pupils as well. Councillor Mawson, did you have your hand up? Oh, sorry, Sue, did you want to come in there?
Just very quickly, Chair. I think I would like to thank Councillor Halawi for highlighting the looked after children situation. It is quite well, just thank you, Councillor Halawi. And maybe there's something about corporate parenting board there and schools. I mean, just maybe we need to think a little bit more about that. But also every school has a teacher who has some responsibility for looked after children. So maybe again, that is something we could do in conjunction with the virtual school. But thank you for raising that, Councillor.
Yeah, I agree. I'd love to work on that issue, Sue, and I'd be very happy to engage in some absolute scrupulous analysis of the language that we use to describe children in our community, because it is key, because it reflects a psychological perspective and, as you said, Chair, potentially an unconscious bias. Thank you.
Councillor Marston.
Yes, thanks, Chair. There's reference to best practice strategies and a cost and funding. Do we know any costs, and is the funding available? And by the way, apologies, I do have to leave the meeting at 11:30. And last comment is Trevor referred to the melting pot at Oakwood, and Alma's just referred to it again. Can I ask people to look at a 1969 record by Blue Mink called Melting Pot? The lyrics are very, very interesting. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Mawson. Trevor, do you want to come in with that?
So in terms of funding, I suppose the answer is yes and no. So there are various funding streams which schools can access depending on what it is they're trying to do and the children that they're working with and so on. So there are additional, the virtual school, for example, would be one of those sources where additional funding can be had. But in the main, schools are funded directly directly from the government. In the case of academies, they're funded in such a way as to have, the government would argue, sufficient funding to be able to meet the needs of their children. And so things like staff training and additional pastoral staff and so on that schools may have, that's a choice that a school will take depending on its financial situation and structure. Some will be able to afford that by making savings elsewhere. Some will not be able to afford it for various reasons.
Thanks, Trevor. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Nugent and then Councillor Higgins. You're muted, Councillor Nugent.
Could I just say that I think what Karen's suggestion about a letter or information following the children from primary school into senior school is very, very, I think that's very useful and very helpful, because hopefully if this contact with parents, more in-depth contact with parents that she has outlined is followed through, hopefully this type of thing will prevent further bullying in senior schools, and where some children have to move out of one school into another because of it. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Councillor Nugent. I absolutely agree. I think it is really. I didn't know we did that, and look, I didn't know it was as in depth as it is, and it's definitely. I think it's definitely useful. Councillor Higgins, Karen, did you want to come in or?
Sorry, yes, I would just thank you, Councillor Nugent, for your comments. I think also it's worth noting that, and I did refer to it, but we are now extending this down into nurseries. We have 87% of 2-year-olds now attending a nursery setting, which is fantastic. I think we're now 10th in the country for the number of 2-year-olds attending, which is amazing. And I think that we've got to continue that life journey of a child the moment they enter into a formal education to promote that what makes the individual successful. So just to make that point as well. But thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. It's just I'd like to ask Trevor. Councillor Halawi mentioned about the children, and you said we would call them out if they said anything wrong. Did you call them out?
Yeah, I was talking about the head teachers there, and
yeah,
yes, we do. If head teachers in any forum really say make any remark that we think is inappropriate or incorrect or doesn't reflect the views and of the council broadly, we would make that we would make that clear, and I can think of examples where that's happened, where we've said actually we'd rather that you didn't use that word, or we disagree with that. That's not an appropriate thing to say, and I would say head teachers are always like anybody else, when they are called out, they're always very apologetic and so on. But I think it's and I think they clearly never wish to cause offence or say or do the wrong thing. But it is just it is, I suppose, reflecting on the importance of language and the damage that language can often inadvertently but can do anyway. We used to have this thing, and I know this is commonplace now, but I remember years ago in the staff room when I was working in schools, there would be a staff room culture sometimes where it was all right to talk in derogatory terms about the children, and people would say, "Oh, I've got such and such a, he's this or he's that," and often it was meant in fun, and often there was no harm in it. But I always felt very strongly that it was the wrong thing to do, because I wouldn't want, if it was my child, I wouldn't want anybody really talking about my child in that way. So when I got into a position where I had some authority in schools, I always made sure that was challenged and not allowed, and was seen as a really bad thing. To talk about children, perhaps to use strong language or whatever, even if it's not meant badly, if it's just meant in jest, it's not funny, because it does change people's attitudes subconsciously often. And I think there are just sometimes we've got to say, no, it's not okay to do that. It's not acceptable to do that. And head teacher, the same as anybody else, should be called out if they did such a thing.
Can I come back, Chair, please? It was because I was surprised that it was still in the notes. When Alma asked, and it was still in the notes, and you said you would call out. That's why I was asking. If they've been called out, why did they put them in the notes for the school? I know I'm being a bit pedantic, but I think it is a very, very important point that Alma made.
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely. I think we need, as professionals in school and as officers in the council, and indeed as elected members, I think we all need to be really thoughtful and mindful about the language that we use, the words that we use, because they make a difference. It really can change people's attitudes, either negatively or positively, depending on what it is. And I think we always with children, we need to focus on the positive.
Yeah, clearly there's points to be made by other members of the scrutiny, but just to respond to that point, if I can, the schools would normally be in attendance today, but because of the return to school on the 8th, and this date was originally for around the 8th, and it was moved slightly, so they'd asked if they could just submit written evidence. The danger with written evidence is they can't expand or elaborate or clarify upon some of the points. So what we can do is seek clarity on that point in relation to what you're saying, Councillor Higgins, because we wouldn't seek to censure different submissions from schools. This is their words, but there is clearly a problem or a point that we've highlighted within that. So why don't we ask for clarity and circulate that to scrutiny? Is that okay?
Yeah. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Can we make sure that happens, please? Karen, did you want to come in on that?
No, thank you. I was just going to say similar to Rob. Thanks.
Councillor Cooper?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I did find Trevor's presentation very interesting, especially when he mentioned respect agenda. I was wondering if that was the initiative of one school, a group of schools, or from the Department for Education. I would like to say that the Department of Education, I would like to see introduce into the curriculum a real life lessons, explaining to teenagers what is acceptable behaviour within the communities, and other stuff like why we have laws and the Green Cross Code. We don't seem to hear much of that at the moment, and personal safety, which is a hot topic at the moment. We have heard in the past of lots of students falling into rivers and things like that, and I think personal safety is something that we should all be aware of. I mean, I'm an adult male and I don't walk through woods at night, and yet the kids seem to run around all over the place. So I would like to see some real life education included. Thank you, Chair.
Karen?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Cooper, there is the new RSHE curriculum, which is the Relationship Sexual Health Education curriculum being implemented from September, which is a more encompassing, more well-rounded curriculum offer from the DFE around personal safety, what constitutes a good relationship, what constitutes a healthy relationship, and that is broad focused from primary all the way up to secondary, and it's non-negotiable, just to make you aware.
Thank you. That sounds excellent.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks, Barry. Councillor Story, I can see your digital hand there.
Right, yeah, it's on page 9 of the papers we were given. On the outward Ackland page, it says number 2, the overview of causes of pupil behaviour, and one of the things was unidentified SEND students, and I was just wondering if you had any figures about how many students are actually unidentified as SEND when they get into secondary school. Do we have any figures on that?
Yeah, Karen May, I can see Karen's hand going up. Karen May, I don't have numbers, but I think that I'm aware of the issue of children with unidentified SEND needs, and it's something that I do feel strongly about, and we actively encourage schools to, if they've got any concerns at all, to get those children the support that they need rapidly. So, and to me, an undiagnosed need, ultimately, it's the school that needs to get on and get the diagnosis done. So my view would always be to encourage schools to get support. We've got a significant EdPsych team within the council and a very active SEND department. So we are happy to help, eager to help schools to get on with that and make sure that children are diagnosed. But sometimes, for all kinds of reasons that are probably beyond the scope of this line of inquiry, schools are sometimes slow at getting on with that process. And we need, as an authority, we need to make that process as easy for them as we can. As a council, we're very generous in providing additional funding for children with SEND needs, more generous than many other councils. sometimes we've got to remind schools about that and encourage them to do it. Karen, I don't know, you might have a slightly more scientific view of that.
Yeah, the difficulty we have is that we have SEND data, but we don't have the breakdown of EHCP children against non-EHCP children, but also classed as SEND. What we are doing though is we are looking at how we use this data more effectively, and I can give you some percentages in a moment. My spreadsheet's just loading up. But in recognition that we do need more robust, we are looking to recruit a SEND advisor, and the SEND advisor will be working in schools to address any attainment gaps. And that's across the piece from primary and into secondary. We've got the job description ready at the moment. It's just waiting the next bit. But if you just bear with me, I'll be able to get you a percentage of total SEND pupils. So from the SEND cohort in 2019, because obviously we're just looking at the census data at the moment, we have 21% of SEND pupils, but again, I don't know the breakdown of EHCP, non-EHCP pupils, but that will be looked at as we go forward in terms of how we track attainment outcomes for pupils, and that's why we've recognised we need this SEND advisor to be recruited to as well. So that's a positive step, and that's between myself and Caroline Cannon's team, collaboratively working to create this SEND officer role, where we're looking at the quality of education on offer for the SEND cohort, EHCP and non-EHCP. So we'll be able to report on that at a later date.
Chair, can I just follow up and ask, is there is enough funding for this? That's my question. Is there enough funding? Have schools got enough help and funding to support SEND pupils?
In the short answer, no, but actually this morning we've had a meeting about a high needs consultation that's going through at the moment, and if the consultation goes as well as we hope it to go, Middlesbrough will see a 1.2% increase on its funding, but that is being consulted on at the moment.
And Chair, for clarity, I think everyone will be aware within Scrutiny, but this is DFE money that comes to local authority and then passported straight to schools. It's not local authority money.
Yeah. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Rob. Councillor Halawi.
Thank you, Chair. As I analysed and studied the evidence, it became very apparent to me that we have considerable proportions of children from other ethnic minorities, like one school had 39%, 21% of which have English as an additional language. Another school had 35% of English as an additional language, which makes it very apparent that we have very diverse communities, as we've said. And in terms of understanding these diversities and all the issues associated with race, religion, etc., how much training are staff given into understanding the backgrounds of all these groups? I mean, are schools liaising with community groups, religious groups, etc., to really understand the thinking behind certain norms of behaviour, certain attitudes towards children and parenting, etc., etc.? Thank you.
Karen?
Thank you, Alma. In terms of your question, again, we are reviewing and very close to organising a change in the way the advisory team is working, recognising that Georgina Chinaka, the EMAT, the Ethnic Minorities Achievement Team Manager, has a wealth of knowledge and skill. I am looking to reshape her role so that she's more interfacing with schools and looking at the team so that the strengths of the team are going into schools and effectively working with classroom practitioners to develop their language and understanding of the teaching of EAL pupils so that they can acquire language more quickly and efficiently. In addition to that, the service level agreement for the EMAT team will continue so that schools can still buy into bespoke teaching assistant support in class. But Georgina's role will be more around upskilling and monitoring the impact of that training of school-based practitioners around the quality teaching of children and young people with English as additional language. In addition to that, Georgina works very closely with public health and the schools community and the wider community of faith groups as well. More recently, last week, she held a WebEx meeting on Thursday for all schools, religious leaders and community leaders to attend around the vaccination process. We understood some groups did not wish to undertake the self-testing, therefore were unlikely to have a vaccination. So we've addressed that very, very quickly. Furthermore, we use the SACRE group, which is the local authority religious representation group, to ensure that there is a wide and shared understanding in the community around, for example, the RSHE curriculum. You know, we recognise that misconception can cause unease and anxiety, and the sooner we address misconception in an open and honest way, the easier the task is for schools to be able to deliver what is national curriculum expectations. We've had some real positive impacts and support from the SACRE group as to how we can work with community leaders, and a consultation with schools, which schools were very much part of, and a part of the working group was held around local authority policy and helping schools to write their own policy based on that, addressing local need and it's supporting and eradicating misconception.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Halawi.
Yeah, thank you, Karen, for that. That's really helpful. And I've been working with Georgina too, so I am aware of some of the projects she's involved in. And I've also tried for several years to be one of the elected members on the SACRE group. But for 2 years when I tried some time ago, it wasn't meeting. So just as a point of detail, I don't know which one of us in the council is on the SACRE group. I've always been very keen to engage in that, but I've never had any information despite making my interest known. The other point was about being proactive in training of staff. You know that we need to be, as you've just said, and this is what I'm backing up, we need to know where we need to go to train staff. It's not just reacting to poor behaviours and training in that way. It's getting, right, we have these community groups in our school community, in our town community, and we need to know what their beliefs, thinking, ideas, and share that with staff so they have a bigger understanding from the outset. And it's not only, is it, and I must stress this, it's not only about these schools which have diverse communities. I think it's for all schools, because what is good for one is also good for other people to have a broader understanding of our town's community, as well as more localised community, obviously possibly to a greater or lesser degree.
Thanks, Councillor Halawi. Karen, do you want to come back in on that?
Well, Alma, we do have a vacancy that I was notified on Friday on SACRE, so if you're in agreement, I will nominate you.
You can nominate me. It might not be democratic, Karen. Other people might be equally interested. So I'm not trying to, but yes, I've always been very keen on that particular working party.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really useful to know, Alma. But just again, to pick up on the SACRE point, you're right, SACRE did have a period of not meeting as regularly, but that has now been rectified, and we have 2 robust chairs from Acklam Grange. We also have Lat Blakelock, who is from the National SACRE group, on the board as well, and I obviously attend those meetings as well, so I hope that's allayed that fear. But just to pick up your point around being proactive around training, I think I can happily report we are again reviewing the nature of the advisory team. And as you will have known, I was the previous senior advisor. I'm not replacing my role, in full on recognition that we need advisors to deliver that training, to pull together like needs. And we'll do that through notes and visits into schools, pulling out what the key priorities are from a group of schools. And then the advisory team will offer, plan, devise, implement the training. We are also trying to resurrect the hub model across Middlesbrough. So the English Hub, for example, have created an action plan of support. So we've got that real strength of operational practice, identifying the training needs of colleagues in schools. But in with my new model of the achievement service, I'm really wishing to push on the school-to-school peer support. You'll be aware that the teaching schools are now no longer in existence. And again, we've gone to a national hub model, but we still have an awful lot of wealth of expertise and knowledge in the town that we need to capitalise on. So again, the model of peer-to-peer support will be introduced, and again through going into schools and having a larger operational team going into schools, we'll have that local intelligence and be able to signpost other schools to best practice in that supportive nature. And I would like just to stress, Chair, at this point, we've always had good relationships with our schools, but now they're even better. So we are having more open, honest and frank conversations around issues. So as Alma highlighted before about calling out people, you know, we have that mechanism now where it can be done at multi-layered, and we can debate and talk about things that are pertinent to schools. So we no longer are reacting to situations, but addressing them as a collective group. And a lot of these meetings actually are led now by head teachers where we attend. We have terms of reference, we have agendas, and we're really capitalising on it. And if I use the word formal, I don't mean formalise the head teacher meetings, but it's recognised as to what the level of discussion that takes place in those meetings. We're looking at the structure of the governance of school improvement, and there's a whole kit and caboodle around the makeup of what that team's going to look at. So I am looking to recruit to the SEND advisor. I am looking to recruit to a secondary advisor. We are going to have a small safeguarding team, and that's in the allowance that we're not recruiting to the senior advisor because we need to be more operational. We need to be recognising the needs. And I'm also trying to tie together that we've got a 0 to 25 education system because, as I say, 87% of children now attending PVIs. We need to make sure that they're going there, they're doing something, they're learning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks for those questions, Councillor Halawi. Councillor Higgins, did you have your hand up? Councillor Story,
no, thank you, Chair.
No? I did see a couple of... Councillor Story, did you?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, schools that have pupils who have English as a second language, are they giving extra funding and extra support to help teachers deal with language barriers?
They are giving extra support, Councillor Story, through the EMAT team. We have sort of 3 layers to that team. One, we have family support workers, and they work with families of children new to the country and new to Middlesbrough to ensure a swift transition into primary schools or whichever schools. We also have, through a service level agreement, the teaching assistant staffing cohort, and they work in classrooms with alongside teachers to support children with additional language in situ. And then of course we have the other aspect of the monitoring and impact of that through the management aspect of the EMAT team, and that's the bit I'm trying to bring more into schools, that Georgina actually goes in and reviews the impact of the training, for example, to ensure that we're going along the right directions. In addition to that, we have a range of network meetings. We've got the DSL, the literacy network meetings at the moment, the head teacher briefings. We will be introducing an EAL network meeting and a SEN network meeting as well. And I think with, you know, we want to take away the overemphasis of those conversations with head teachers. We actually want to see the impact of work going on that then head teachers can report on, maybe termly or annually, rather than having a meeting for meeting's sake. It's more to do with getting the right level of learning and supporting the classroom practitioners to deliver that to the best of their ability.
Thanks, Karen. Councillor Halawi, did you put your hand up?
Yes, please, Chair. I would like to express huge thanks on behalf of all of us, I'm sure, for the evidence that was submitted, because it was really, really interesting reading. 2 aspects of information which I was looking for and didn't find in the evidence provided about bullying was, one, there wasn't any mention of academic bullying. And since I'm aware that some of our secondary schools stream quite rigorously in terms of academic ability, I wondered about fallout from that in terms of bullying in the schoolyard or wherever, or maybe it's not an issue. I'd be very happy to find it's not an issue. And the second aspect of bullying that I didn't find mentioned particularly, although it was just touched upon, was the issue of online bullying. And I didn't find any mention, maybe I've missed it in the evidence, of the Middlesbrough Digital Resilience Group, which is a very successful group that operates across the town with many schools engaging. So I was looking for the Digital Resilience Group. I'm part of that network, obviously. So I think, oh, where's all the good work that comes from that? And I didn't find it.
Karen, did you want to come back on that?
Not on the digital resilience group that Alan was referring to, but just to confirm, the Tees Valley Combined Authority has some funding that's going into schools for schools to actually work upon their digital offer, including the policies around online safety.
And anything about academic bullying? Any thoughts on that from anyone? Because I'm sure it exists actually, but it wasn't evidenced in the evidence reports that we got.
We can always send that back to the schools if you like, Councillor Malawi, as well as the digital. Georgina, if we could do that, just send those back to the schools and ask them about that. Thank you. Any more questions?
I did have something else, Chair. Just let me find it in my notes. Oh yeah, I didn't find any in terms of supportive things. I mean, I'm very much in favour of Proclaim, and I echo what someone said about what's good for one category of children is good for all children. So I'm glad that Proclaim is getting a wider reach as a project. It was restorative justice as a mechanism for improving behaviour when dealing with challenges. Are we not talking about that anymore? Well, I know we are in some schools, but it wasn't mentioned in any of the schools' reports.
Karen?
Sorry, Almi, are you referring to restorative practice? Yes, I think.
Sorry, yes.
I think that you know, maybe it's not mentioned in the reports because it's quite well embedded.
Sorry, Trevor, I just think it would have been worth a mention because it's such an important, well, hopefully well embedded situation, which does and has definitely improved. I've seen statistics about how that has helped improve behaviour. So I thought, oh, I'll look to see what's happening with that now. And then I couldn't find that either. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Well, again, Georgina, if we could just send that back to schools and we'll get some more in-depth information on that. Any more questions from anyone for Karen or Trevor? No? Great. Thank you very much, Trevor and Karen. That's been really interesting, really insightful. Thank you for joining us. Can we all, Georgina, can we send a thanks to all the schools as well for their information? I think that's been really, a lot of it's been really interesting and yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, will do.
Great. So that, Karen, Trevor, you can stay if you want, or if you want to leave, you're more than welcome to. Thank you very much. I'll go on to agenda item 6.
Thank you.
Thanks. Agenda item 6, which is our education and COVID-19 recovery from Sue Butcher. Sue?
Thank you, Chair. I'll give a brief update as to where we are with recovering from COVID. Generally, I think the first and the main thing is that children have returned to school on the 8th of March, which I'm sure you all know. It's gone well, generally, no specific issues to report. Some schools had a more phased return, but I think we're really pleased that with the way that's gone. In the last meeting, we talked about the money that we'd gained for laptops. That money has been distributed now, so all children should have remote learning, the access to remote learning, but of course children are back in school now. We are very pleased also that the number of vulnerable children returning to school is high. It's in the 90%, so that's particularly pleasing. We do still have some staff and children self-isolating. In order to be able to track our vulnerable children in a more tight way, we have just secured funding for Welfare Call. Welfare Call is, Rob may be able to explain it slightly better in a second, is about they will tell us, we commission Welfare Call, and they will be able to tell us on a daily basis which of our vulnerable children are or aren't in school, so we can take immediate action. We've just got the news of that this morning, so I'm delighted to be able to tell you first. Okay, so in terms of testing, that's going well as well. The holiday, I can't remember what HAF stands for. Rob, what does HAF stand for?
Holiday Activities Fund.
holiday activities fund. The learning side, the curriculum development side, is over to schools, as it were, but we are putting in enrichment activities in conjunction with public health, and programs are being put together for the Easter holidays and beyond. Just excuse me a second. And generally, we are keeping in close contact with schools through secondary head schools, through our own maintained schools, through meetings with primary schools. And I think the good relationship with schools continues, and hopefully we can continue to build on that. So generally, that's a quick rundown of where we are with COVID. We are very much hoping, and I think it's happening, that COVID is almost becoming business as usual. We are continue to work through COVID. It's going to be with us for a while. We need to keep our children in school. We need to keep the learning going, and schools are absolutely doing their absolute best to do that. And hopefully COVID will go away, but at the moment it's COVID business as usual.
Great, thank you, Sue. Any questions for Sue on that? No, brilliant, thank you very much. So we'll go on to agenda item 7, which is the overview and scrutiny board. The OSB has met a few times since our last meeting, so I'll give you a quick rundown. On the 27th of January, the board received information on the budget consultation. On the 29th of January, the board considered the call-in in respect of the disposal of Nunthorpe Grange Farm. On the 11th of February, the board considered the Executive Forward Work Programme, Middlesbrough Council's response to COVID-19, an update from the Executive Member for Regeneration, the final report from the Culture and Community Scrutiny Panel on Social Cohesion and Integration, and updates from the Scrutiny Panel Chair. On the 11th of March, the board considered the Executive Forward Work Programme, an update from the Mayor, Middlesbrough Council's response to COVID-19, the final report from Economic Development, Environment and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel on Pest Control Services, the final report from the Health Scrutiny Panel on Opioid Dependency, What Happens Next, and the overview OSB call-in outcome on the disposal of the Nunthorpe Grange Farm and updates from the Security Panel Chair. Got agenda item 8, any other urgent items, which I don't have any, and that's the end of the meeting, so thank you all for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.